In version 25.2, CockroachDB gains a much requested and much anticipated new feature, and that's row-level security, an incredibly powerful way to lock down your data and satisfy regulatory compliance. In and of itself, row-level security is already enormously powerful, but when paired with multi-region geo-partitioning, you can guarantee that data will not only be physically stored in a locality, but also that it will never leave that locality. Today I'll show you how to use row-level security in CockroachDB to give you an idea as to what this new feature will look like. This functionality will drop in 25.2, which at the time of recording is currently in beta. By the time this video is available, it will be generally available. So you'll see me use Cockroach Beta instead of the Cockroach binary, and that simply refers to my local beta instance of the Cockroach binary. I'll spin up a 9-node simulated multi-region local cluster using Cockroach Demo, and I'll create a database called Store. We'll simulate an e-commerce workload with 3 regions, US East 1, US West 1, and Europe West 1. I'll create a regional by row table whereby data for East Coast, West Coast, and European customers will be stored physically in those locations. Then I'll create a user, which might be used by a microservice that accesses member information. And for this demo, I'll just grant everything to that user. Next, I'll alter the member table to enable row-level security. To disable row-level security, it's the opposite. And I'll insert data for the 3 regions. A at acme.com will be stored in US East 1, B will be stored in West 1, and C will be stored in Europe West 1. If I select everything out of the table, we'll see that each of these users is being stored in their respective regions. Now I'll log in as the member service in another terminal, and I'll show you the gateway region that I'm connected to. And we're connected to US East 1. If I select everything from the table, we'll see that the user doesn't actually see any rows at the moment because while we've enabled row-level security, we haven't actually created any policies that would allow the user to see any data. And that goes for writes as well. If I try to insert anything into the table, we've violated the row-level security policies for that table, and our insert is rejected. Let's fix that by creating a policy on the table. I'll call it regional access. It's on the member table and it's currently applied to all users. And what it will do is whenever anyone requests data from that table, it will ensure that they'll only see data for the region that they're connected to. When connected to US East 1, I'll only see data for US East 1. Now, when I perform the same select again, we'll see that I now have access to that one row that is in US East 1. Running an explain will show you why this is. Any request that I make against this table is automatically being filtered by CockroachDB to include just US East 1 data. If I try to manually filter on another region, the query will first filter by US East 1 and then filter by US West 1, so no data is returned. I can now insert US East 1 data into the table, but I can't insert data for other regions. If I log out as this user and log back in with the same user, but this time to a node in US West 1, I'll select the gateway region, which is now US West 1. I can select US West 1 member data. As with the East Coast user, I can also insert data for US West members, but I can't insert data for members in other regions. And the same story holds for data in Europe. If I connect to a Europe node, select the gateway region, we're now connected to a node in Europe West 1. I can only view data for members in Europe West 1. As before, I can insert data for members in Europe, but I can't insert data for any other members. You might be wondering what these policies actually look like under the covers. Let's take a look. Running a query against PG catalog PG policies yields one row, and that's our regional access policy. It's a permissive policy. All policies created without any restrictions are created by default as permissive policies. It's against all roles, and here's the expression that I created the policy with. There's also a shortcut, show policies for, and then the table name, which in our case is member, and that's another way of showing data for that table. When you combine permissive policies, you're granting users with access to any data that matches any of the policies. Think of it as a this policy or that policy. The opposite of which is a restrictive policy, which requires that a user must have this policy and this policy. Let's take a look at restrictive policies now. In this example, I'll create the same member table, but it will be in a multi-tenant scenario. I'll create a tenant table that will store the ID and the name of the tenant, and I'll create the member table again, but this time it will include a tenant ID, which forms part of the primary key. Both tables are regional by row. Next, I'll create 2 users, both member services as in the last example, but this time they're tenant specific. One will be for the Acme company and one will be for another company. I'll enable row-level security for the member table, insert some tenant data. So we'll have an Acme Incorporated company and an other company, both based in US East 1. I'll create some members for the Acme company, spread across different regions, and I'll create some data for the other company, or other tenant. Looking at the data, We have 3 users for the Acme Incorporated company and 3 users for the other incorporated company. Now I'll create some policies. The first will be a restrictive policy, which uses the same logic as the previous example, but this time is restrictive. Users must have a combination of this policy and another more permissive tenant-specific policy in order to view their data. First, I'll create that, and then I'll create 2 permissive policies. One for the Acme tenant to the Acme member service, and one for the other tenant to the other member service. Now, if I ask for all US East 1 data for the Acme service account, I'll only see Acme data for US East 1. The same holds for US West 1 and Europe West 1, while the other tenant is only able to see its data, US East 1, other company data, US West 1, other company data, and Europe West 1, other company data. If we take a look at the explain, we'll see that any queries to this table also include the region and the tenant ID. So what I've just demonstrated is the same user, the member service, or a multi-tenant specific member service, accessing the same table, but only viewing a small subset of the data. Our powerful geo-partitioning feature allows you to physically house data in a specific location, but when combined with row-level security, you can limit a user to only being able to select regional data. Whereas before, a select star against the same table would have yielded results across all regions. Now it's only regional specific. If you apply the policy, for non-administrative table owners, you can create a forced policy, which will subject them to the restrictions of the policy as well. By default, they would be able to see the whole table. Give row-level security a try and see how it will benefit your workloads.